Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Future Focused Learning podcast, where we explore the intersection of technology and education and strive to answer the big question: how do we prepare students for the future? I'm your host, Kyla Bolden, founder and CEO of WizKid Learning. Each episode, we bring you insightful conversations with educators, industry leaders, and changemakers who are transforming learning environments and equipping students with the skills they need to thrive in an ever-evolving world. So today on the podcast, we have Kim Cooper, who is a dear friend and a business associate. WizKid Learning has actually collaborated with her company several times in the last couple years. She is the president and CEO of Youth Culture, which is a social impact business and consulting and professional service company that aims to amplify youth voices and engagement in industry and the evolving economy to help solve real world problems. So, Kim, like myself, is a self defined impact entrepreneur. So, it was really exciting getting to speak with somebody who has really created a company not just for entrepreneurship's sake, but for impact's sake as well. In this episode, we talk a lot about the skills that students will need to know and be equipped with for the future. We talk a lot about how to create a culture within our companies that facilitates intergenerational learning and a workforce environment that's conducive to individuals from many different types of backgrounds. And we just have a great conversation about all things future focused learning. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I know I surely had a great conversation and a great time talking with Kim. And let's get into it. Kim, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I'm super happy to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So we have actually done work with youth culture before. We've collaborated on multiple different things in the past, and very much similar to WizKid, Kim, you are an impact-focused business person. You think about impact in everything that you do, and I think that's terrific because, business doesn't just have to be business and then you think about like the nonprofit space. That's not the only way to make an impact. You could have an impact focused company. So I'm really, really excited to talk to you about youth culture. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and a little bit more about youth culture?
Sure. Yes. I started Youth Culture Inc. during the pandemic. So in 2020, and Youth Culture is really a social impact company where innovation meets inclusion and youth drive change, really. So we are a consulting and professional services company, and we partner and work with leading corporate clients and organizations to work on projects that really tackle real world problems and engage youth in meaningful ways and really champion diversity and inclusion. So we work on some really cool projects around here, Kyla.
I've always been a fan of what youth culture does. It seems like you've had a lot of history in the space of impacting children when you were at First Robotics and now at Youth Culture. And I always like to ask our guests, because when it comes to me at WizKid, I've always loved kids. I've tutored kids, but I did not plan to go into industries that were going to be so centered around education or impacting children and young people in this way. I originally had planned to go into consulting, but it kind of just found me and it felt really right. So I wanted to know, was this something that you always were passionate about? Did you always know that you were going to go into fields that centered around more so impacting youth, or was this something that just kind of fell into your lap?
Well, I've always been interested in kids and youth content. So it's really that content that has driven me since I was a kid. I always loved writing. I loved drawing, illustrating, and that has stuck with me even till now, decades and decades later. So I've always been interested in that. And I went to university actually in a strange turn of events. Originally, I was going to study creative writing, and then I ended up studying Japanese and business. So my university degree is a Bachelor of Arts in Pacific and Asian Studies with a concentration in Japanese and business. But so I lived in Japan. I taught English, and when I was teaching English, it really got me interested in that sort of content and education side of teaching and working with people of all ages, including kids. So when I came back to Canada, I gravitated towards the media side and really communication. So in the last few decades, my focus has been more on kids and youth programming and content creation and media. So I worked in broadcasting for a while. I worked for Family Channel, Disney Junior as a digital producer. I was the editor of some kids magazines. So that kept me in the content side of things. And then I eventually entered the STEM world and joined First Robotics Canada. And then I decided, okay, robotics and tech, this is where all the kids are and that I have to be as well. So that's where I sort of morphed my career from that point.
Oh, wow, that's super interesting. And it's very, I always love hearing about what people study in university. Sometimes it's very related, sometimes it's not related at all. I know for me, I went into university wanting to study like political science and economics, and I ended up doing English with a focus in the African diaspora. And now I work in obviously tech, education technology. And I feel like we always probably get asked, you probably get asked, did you study something that was related to this? I don't know. I get asked that question sometimes as well too. And I'm like, no, but I think yes. I think a lot of those like bachelors of arts or those like humanities studies actually do so much for you. You know, we come from an industry where we are like encouraging students to learn these skills, like these technical skills or these like workforce development skills. Absolutely, they need to know that, but they also need to be informed in like how to communicate properly, how to like research, how to look at things from various different perspectives and cultural identities, all of those things, which I think is something that probably both of our majors made us do very well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's funny how a diverse and sort of versatile background, it's amazing how it can help the industry in general down the road. I love it when we're able to develop a program of some sort, but bring in elements of a totally different industry. Like I'll never forget once I went to like a restaurant and hospitality conference, and what I learned from that conference really ended up impacting one of our hackathons that we had, years later. And so you just never know where you're going to pick up these gems of innovative ideas that you can apply later.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm always taking inspiration from so many other places. I think that's something that's probably goes on in many of us entrepreneurs' mind. Now, you mentioned hackathons, and I know that's something that youth culture has been doing and has been very successful of doing. Do you want to just tell us a little bit more about youth culture and its mission?
Sure. A big part of what we do here is to engage people, especially people from underrepresented communities, in opportunities and projects and lots of different initiatives. So, for example, we work with TD, and we have done a number of focus groups for their lab division, where we work with youth who are new to Canada, and we listen to the voices of those youth and the kinds of challenges, struggles, ideas that they have, background in finance, that sort of thing. So we're able to give these youth a voice and a platform to share, some of their adversities in some cases, but then also have them part of the conversation of when it comes to like innovation and product development and that sort of thing. And another program we have with First Robotics Canada is we work with kids with Down syndrome, and we're adapting the first Lego League kit to really give kids with disabilities, in this case mostly kids with Down syndrome, a chance to learn coding and robotics through that program. So we're redoing the PowerPoints, the notebook, and then scaling back the program a little bit so that it works for kids in this community. And it's incredible work. And not only that, it's not just about the program and developing that content. We've employed youth and young adults with Down syndrome to be mentors in that program. So we're trying to also give paid employment opportunities wherever we can to people who are really struggling to find work, right? And as we see as technology is evolving so quickly, we left people behind before, but there's this increasing risk that history is going to repeat itself, but perhaps even at a different level if we don't find ways to include people who have been excluded in the past. So very passionate about inclusion in our whatever projects we're working on, whether it's in technology, sustainability, nature. We always try to give people those employment opportunities to be a part of our team and help develop and work on those projects.
And something that you mentioned there that I found really interesting is that we talk about like user-centric design when we're building out technology, and it really seems like your programs are really informed by the users, by the end client even more. So, with the TD program, you're giving these young people, these youth, like a say and like making their voices heard, right? And then I know youth culture does a lot of work and is set up in a way that actually includes the opinions and the desires and the interests of the actual students that they are serving, which might sound obvious, but it's not very like as common throughout our industry. So can you talk a little bit about how you are integrating, your students and the individuals that are taking your participants inside the way you're going about your mission when it comes to youth culture?
Yeah, and you're right. It would seem like that should be almost common sense, or just everyone's doing it, but they're not, because I think it's really, really hard when we get multiple generations of people in the workplace, and it's very hard to have that deep understanding of that generation and what motivates them, inspires them, and then be able to build teams that harness both the strengths of all those generations that are at play on this work team, but then also teach and train them to uplift each other with some of the weaknesses that our generations have, right? So for when we work with youth in particular, in Gen Z, we got to keep it fresh all the time, and motivation is one that is really tricky because I know we tend to make these broad statements about certain generations and their traits, but it is also true that to keep people motivated, it's often individual motivations, right? So we really have to leverage whatever platforms they're on and keeping that momentum up. So, whether that be Discord or Slack or whatever chat that they're using, and 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 assigning youth leaders in those roles to be those influencers and mobilizers to keep their to keep the projects really moving, right? And it's something like, for me, my generation, it's hard to keep up with that, and then it's hard to sometimes rein it in, like, to meet this common goal. So, you know what, it's a commitment of continuous learning. It's continuous learning, and I think the most successful workplaces will really find ways for different generations to work together, but understand each other, and then take our projects to the next level in order to innovate. And it's tricky. There's honestly, we're trying new things every day, Kyla. Like, it's not like I am an authority yet on this topic, because every day, we're okay, let's try this. And I think that's the beauty so far about youth culture is, it's scary sometimes, but we're okay with taking risks. Okay, this didn't work so well. What can we try? So I think, a big breakthrough is coming. There's been many breakthroughs over the last 3 or 4 years that there's been, but one day that massive breakthrough is going to happen. And it's going to really change how corporations, organizations, and all these, have that intergenerational collaboration. It's going to happen one day.
I think it's so important to think about like motivation, as you said, in like an individualized standpoint, as well as, intergenerationally, really, because, different people are motivated by different things. And I think that what you're doing is not to like use the word that's in your name, but you're creating like a culture of motivation, right? Like you're
Yeah.
using things like Discord, and you're using having like leaders, like youth leaders, all of those things in order to create like a culture of like, this is how we are motivated at youth culture. This is how what we believe in. And I think at the end of the day, something that has stayed true throughout history is like movements actually do motivate people. Missions motivate people no matter what. But
Yeah.
I definitely agree. It's something that like us at WizKid, we're constantly figuring out, okay, how do we engage students more? That's one of the reasons why our curriculum and our assets and everything, we call them living documents that are updated often and change often, because we want our programming, we want our courses to be relevant and interesting to our students. And because of how quickly everything is moving now, you can't just create a curriculum, create a program, and like leave it for a year and expect to do the same thing next year. It's not going to work. And it brings me to like a thought I have about education a lot. So the world has changed a ton, but education is still being done the same, right? Like, and there hasn't been as much changes in it. And I think there also hasn't been a lot of changes in like the development of how we create curriculum, create educational programs. And with things changing so quickly, it's really hard for the education space to actually keep up with not even just what the students need to learn, but like how to engage them. And I know you work closely with a lot of students, and you probably hear about like their feelings when it comes to schools or colleges or etc. What are some things that you think need to change within the education space in order for it to be not just more relevant to, let's say, Gen Z, but more impactful to them?
It's a hard question, because you're right. The pace is really tough
Mm-hmm.
for the education system um, that currently exists to adapt, right? And so that's why programs like yours, WizKid, and WizKid Learning, it's so important to have those programs that really leverage technology, coding, the latest hands-on learning that kids really need these days for their future careers. Same with, I mean, in youth culture, we also deliver programs for school boards where we go in and we talk about careers of the future. And that's really, really important because a lot of the students that come to us for our career coaching program, they don't know the options, and they're not just thinking about today's option as in, you know, a doctor, a vet, whatever, it could be skilled trades, whatever it is. It's sort of like all of those titles of what careers were called even when I was back in school, they're still the same, right? Where now even the titles of careers and what the opportunities, it's totally changed. So if kids, even as young as kids, but youth, you know, high school age, if they don't realize, oh, you know, like a data analyst is an actual job, or a space technologist, like that, they don't realize that that's a career option. So I guess for the education system to really welcome those conversations of what are the careers of the future, to ensure that students will be choosing paths that will, where they can actually afford to live, right? Like, and I think that's where sometimes the students that we meet, again, so I don't know if you know, like, I'm also a career strategist. So I studied to become a career strategist, and then a few others at youth culture also have this certification, so that when students come to us for career coaching, that we can, you know, kind of walk through what are your passions. And a lot of them do still love the arts, which is amazing. But those traditional jobs that you used to think for the arts, you know, people may not be able to make a living that way anymore. So when we walk through, or when we go through these, our career coaching kind of mapping with students, then we think, okay, you like the arts, and then we try to tie in, okay, well, what else do you like? If there's like any sort of gaming that they're interested in, or like design, you know, then you can kind of be like, well, have you ever thought of a career in the arts plus, you know, architecture, or plus, like, start to opening the minds to different pathways rather than traditional careers. So I guess that's one way, is if the education system can really embrace those careers of the future, it's so important.
And I think it just becomes a question of how can we expose them to these things, right? Like, I think a lot of students don't know that you could be a data scientist that works for the NBA, right? There's so many real incredible ways for you to be able to intertwine your passion into what you do, and then also having realistic understanding of, okay, how long does it take to get somewhere where you're super passionate about your everyday job, right? And like, you know, it takes a while, right? And I feel sometimes there is, and you probably experienced this, a like not grounded in reality expectation on how long it might take you to love your day-to-day job, when
Right.
you're in entry level position, right? And I
Right.
think that's often because, just like, you know, the upward mobility in careers are not always properly explained to those incoming students, the younger people who are entering in the workforce. But
Yeah.
it does take time. But I think the biggest thing at WizKid, we see
Yeah.
that a lot of students just don't know what they can be, you know? They don't know all the roles that are out there. They know the traditional ones, and they're like, I don't want to be that. And it's like, okay. And then they know the other ones that they might see on social media, and they're like, well, that might seem too hard. And they don't know like the skills that they need to take to either get there, or, how the steps that they need to take or the things that they need to study to get to that place. So just being like, okay, these are the opportunities that exist out here, and
Yeah.
allowing them to take the courses, gain the skills that give them more options for opportunities. Because I always say to the kids, WizKid coding, in the beginning, we started as WizKid coding, and we were just teaching students coding. And that was like a little over 8 years ago. Now we've expanded to a lot more like workforce development, career development, AI, cybersecurity, the list goes on and on. And we still teach coding because we think it's important for students to know, but you no longer need to know 12 coding languages. Like you could
Right.
learn Python and a few others, or
Yeah.
just Python and be okay. But the reasons why they should take these skill development courses and these tech courses is to open themselves up to more opportunities, so that you could be working in one space one day and be like, you know what, I think I want to try something in something more creative or something more technical. Like, let them understand the opportunities. And this kind of brings me to one of the big questions that we try to answer on the podcast, which is, okay, how can we prepare students for the future? So what can we do? We've been talking about how much things have been changing. We hear statistics like 67% of incoming elementary school students will work in jobs that don't exist yet, and it's probably even a lot higher now. Like there's so much uncertainty around what the future workforce, what this future world will look like. But I
Mhm.
think there still definitely remain skills, whether they're technical, soft skills, communication skills, etc., that students can learn now at a younger age or early in their career that's going to help them in the future. So, in your opinion, what are those key skills that students should be honing in now on, so that they could have better opportunities in the future?
I think there are a few skills that come to mind. One is adaptability, actually, and that might not seem sort of like a tangible skill, and it's sometimes you need that um, real world workplace learning to learn adaptability. But I don't think, especially during COVID, a lot of young people didn't have any experience during COVID. Like they weren't able to get a job, sometimes not even a volunteer job. So raising awareness that being adaptable with your skills and that your journey is one of continuous learning is really key, right? Because as companies, as organizations try to adjust, leverage, harness technology, and then keep up with that and stay sustainable, it means that it could be a messy road, right? So you need to be able to adapt to different work environments, to different tasks, and really be flexible and willing to learn, right? So I find that the young people that I meet, if they have a sense of resourcefulness, they're resourceful, they can find answers to anything just by doing their own research, asking people, that sort of thing. Like being resourceful is a huge skill, and then being able to adapt to whatever is coming at them, and being efficient with time. Time management is a really key skill, as you know. And then communications, I think communication's always important. I mean, not so much written these days because of chat, right? Chat GPT. So as long as you are adept in like prompt engineering with chat GPT, you could probably get by with your writing. But as far as right now working with in the workforce with humans, you do need to have verbal communications and understand that there's sort of a workplace etiquette and that sort of thing. And then digital skills, even when you think where robotics will be in 5 and 10 years, not everyone is going to be a robotics engineer or you know, necessarily be building the components of a robot. However, it is smart for everyone at a younger age to be more familiar, comfortable with robotics and technology, because we will be seeing that more in retail and in so many other industries. So the more you're comfortable with it, the more you can apply to those jobs that connect some way to those advanced technologies without having to be that engineer, in those
Absolutely. What you said about robotics, I just wanted to touch on that point a little bit, because oftentimes we think, okay, well, if they have no interest in robotics, then like there's no need for them to learn anything about it. And that's really not true when it comes to technology or like any type of tech field. I'm not saying that
yeah
you have to know everything and go into everything, but I would say most companies that are prevalent right now are tech companies. And there isn't
yeah
an industry that I don't think is almost fully dependent on technology in some way. Like I can't think of one that, whether it's agriculture to music, etc., like tech is the basis of that. And if they had to take away all the technology in that industry, in today's age, it wouldn't be able to function, right? So
right
oftentimes, even like from the aspect of learning to code, you might not be the person who's coding day in and day out, but in order for you to lead a team of coders or lead in a company that is dependent on a software, it is going to be helpful for you to understand how technology works and it's built and etc. And the same when it comes to robotics and like these other tech sectors, it would be very hard. I use like fashion as an example. It would be very hard for you to be a CEO of like a fashion house if you don't know anything about fashion. Even though your day to day might not be, sewing, it won't be sewing, and it won't be, designing, it'll probably be more on the business side. But if you don't
yeah
know anything about fashion, you're not going to be able to be as effective leader as that person who has those experiences in, those skills. So it's the same thing when it comes to technology. And I also love what you said about adaptability, because that is something that I think is super important. I mean, we as humans have had to adapt a lot over the last 4 years about how we live our life, how we go about things, etc. And
mhm,
the ability to do something the same way for a long period of time and having to change it is something that's really hard, but it needs to be practiced, right? It's
yeah
not something that, and you could probably speak more about this, but it's not something that you should only experience when you get into your adult life. Like children should be practicing how to be adaptable.
yes, absolutely, right.
Mhm.
um yeah, and which is really kind of a fascinating thing to think about. When How do we do that better? How do we give kids and youth more opportunities to practice that adaptation, right? Like, could be a collaborative project right there, Kyle.
Probably, yeah. I'm thinking about it, or my wheels are turning. Well, I
Yeah.
want to thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. I mean, like we said, the big question we try to answer is like, how do we successfully prepare students for the future? And youth culture is definitely doing that in part with like your trainings and your programming and everything that you're doing. So I want to thank you for that. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, that was such a fun conversation, and I completely agree with Kim. Adaptability is going to be one of those skills, and currently is one of these skills that students are really going to need for the future. I mean, the world is changing so quickly with the fast pace of technology and just how everything in the world is changing. It's going to be super important for students to be adaptable, and adults, really everyone. So I so enjoyed having that conversation with Kim. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. And if you liked it, please make sure to give us 5 stars and share this with a friend. And I can't wait for you guys to hear the next episode. Have a great day.